Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Well, if you notice, it's getting a little colder out there. We're going to talk about winter energy prices. But first, what about the big stories of the week? You mean the Pennsylvania legislature is actually considering how to pay for that $32 billion budget? We'll find out from a couple of the state's leading reporters, and we'll do all of that after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, this is a bit unusual. Here we are, we're almost at Halloween, and we still have, the legislature and the governor still haven't figured out to pay for the $32 billion that they have agreed to spend in the current fiscal year. They passed the budget, meaning how they want to spend the money, $32 billion back in June 30, and they still haven't figured out how they're going to pay for it. Well, joining me to ferret all that out is Katie Meyer. She's a Capitol Bureau Chief with WITF, that's public radio, and Angela Couloumbis. She's with the Philadelphia Inquirer. They cover the Capitol. You folks live up in the Capitol, right? You have no home. You're just pretty much.
Yeah.
All right, Angela, let's start with you because you've been through any number of these. Where does this stand in terms of a $2.2 billion shortfall at least?
Right.
So how are they proposing to pay for this?
Largely through borrowing. And at this point in time, earlier this week, the House, the Republican-controlled House, passed a plan that upped the amount of money that the state would borrow to $1.5 billion to help cover this deficit. And then they would do some other things like fund transfers or transfers from special funds and, a few taxes, but not many. Mm-hmm. And if you speak to any expert in municipal or public finance, they will tell you that borrowing and other such one-time solutions should be really last resort solutions. Yeah. And in this case, we just still have this fundamental ideological divide in the Capitol over taxes and whether to raise them.
Yeah, okay. The governor originally proposed a fairly modest budget, 1.8% increase. It seems to me that the big debate, not just in terms of how to pay for it, but has been over something called the severance tax. That's a tax on the amount of cubic feet extracted from these fracked wells, these deep wells. And the House has been no way, no how, particularly the Republicans led by the Speaker, Mike Terzai. There's something in this.
There's something brewing, yeah. The governor, by the way, he campaigned on the severance tax. This has been his priority for a long time. But yeah, it's had a real hard time getting even onto the House floor. There was, a discharge resolution that failed. It's been stuck in various committees forever. But yesterday, they did get it out of committee. They got it out of the Finance Committee, which was a little bit different than what they've been trying to do before. Right. They were trying to get it out of the Environmental Resources and Energy Committee, which is more conservative.
And it was bipartisan.
It was bipartisan. Six Republicans voted for it, which was huge. I mean, and Gene DiGirolamo, who's the guy who, he's a moderate Republican who's been pushing this for a long time. He was overjoyed, but I mean, it's very unlikely it's going to get a vote anytime soon. You ask any of the leaders. I asked Dave Reed yesterday.
So hold on, I need to stop you here.
Yeah.
You say, is that going to be part of the deal to raise the $2.2 billion?
No.
You're shaking your head no.
No, it's not going to be. And you ask why, and they say, oh, we don't have support for it. Lots of people think there is support for it in the House, but the leaders don't want it. And they're not going to put it on the calendar. They're going to put it on the calendar because all bills go on the calendar, but they're not going to bring it up soon. So
so they're going to borrow from a tobacco settlement that was reached, it seems like about 7-8 years ago, if not longer. That money's supposed to go into health care, and the state has to pay that back, $1.2 billion over
20 years.
Yeah, over the long haul.
With interest.
With interest. But how does that solve the problem?
It doesn't. It doesn't solve the problem. And yesterday, the Senate Majority Leader held a press conference, and we asked him, 4 months from now, Governor Wolf is going to give his next budget address for the next fiscal year, and it's going to be in an election year. So there's going to be the general unwillingness to do anything big and bold and aggressive and potentially controversial. So Going into next year, you're going to be facing the same problems, which is the state has been saddled with these chronic deficits, and it has been unable to figure out the correct balance of maybe cutting and raising new revenue.
All right, let's talk, but there are at least 2 taxes in there that look like they're probably going to make it through. One is on fireworks, of all things.
Yep.
Oh, we're not near the 4th of July anyway. I don't know. Do they do fireworks on New Year's Eve anymore?
Sure.
A little bit. So a tax on fireworks, and then on online, is it online?
Third party.
Online third-party sales. So basically, like things that are sold through Amazon weren't getting taxed before, but now they will be. But I will say, these taxes are minuscule. It's going to be like, what, $20 million with the two of them combined. And, you know, remember, it's a $3.2 billion budget, and we have a $2.2 billion shortfall. So that's just a drop in the bucket.
Yeah. So on at least one other important matter is that they've postponed. We had this big discussion about gaming.
Oh, yes.
These VGTs, as they're called, some 40,000 of them. I would joke and say
Up to,
but hold on. There would be one in every telephone booth. If we had telephone booth, you could go in. Is that all? What's with the gaming?
Yes. So part of the this agreement that's sort of brewing in the Capitol does rely on expanding gambling in the state, and that includes legalizing online gambling and some other components. However, the VGT issue has been the big sticking point, and yesterday the Senate's one of the Senate top leaders basically said we're not going to do the VGTs.
So that's off.
So that's off, and that is going to create yet another clash with the House. And you know, you have to remember that they've been trying to expand gambling for the last couple of years.
All right, we're going to run to a break. We may pick up a piece of this or two, and then we'll move on. We're going to move on to another subject. I've been wary of doing this because it's been going on for month and month, but we'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, Angela Couloumbis and Katie Meyer are here. They write for a couple of pretty important organizations, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Katie's the Capitol Bureau Chief with WITF. We're talking about the failure of the legislature for months to come up with a spending plan. They've got the programs outlined, $32 billion. They've agreed what they're going to spend, but they haven't figured out how they're going to pay for it. Maybe that's better put. All right, Katie, there's one other big thing that has to be dealt with. The state-related institutions, Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh, Penn State, Lincoln University, and Temple, they get, $600–700 million or so. It's in the budget, but it takes a special 2/3 vote. They're getting antsy now. What's going to happen there?
Yeah, so the House has to pass that, and the House will only pass that if there's enough money appropriated or planned for in the budget in order to pay for that. So that hasn't happened yet. And yeah, so these, basically these funds are used to subsidize tuition for in-state students. So in-state kids get a discount because of this state appropriation, and it's gone down over the years too. And different schools are affected differently. Obviously, Penn State's a huge school. Tuition will go up for in-state students for sure, but they're not going to be.
The University of Pittsburgh people were complaining.
There were some complaints there. Nobody wants it.
But for Lincoln University, down in the southeastern part of our state, that's a much larger portion of the budget.
Yeah, they get, I think, 30% of their, operating budget from this state appropriation, so that's huge. And Lincoln's also one of the only historically black colleges in Pennsylvania. This is significant.
Cheney's the other.
Cheney's the other one, and really they have to agree on revenue in order to pass this money, and they haven't been able to.
Yeah.
And as we talked about before, if gambling doesn't get passed, that's going to be a real sticking point. That's going to prevent this.
Now, historically, you've covered a lot of these. It takes a 2/3 vote, but that's been most of the time pro forma, right? I mean, there's no...
It has been. There are some people who think this has become a bit of a bargaining chip in the whole negotiations over the state budget. But, I'll leave you with this thought, which is we were talking earlier about how, real people aren't really feeling the impact of this impasse. Well, this is one way they will feel this impact.
That's a great point. That's a great point. I mean, most services are being performed. Right. No state employees are laid off. No programs are curtailed. Right. Services are being delivered. But that's a great point. If that doesn't get done at some point, you could see, as both you and Katie have pointed out, a tuition hikes that right now ought to be avoidable. All right, at any rate, let's go to another subject. This past week, the congressman from the 10th Congressional District named Tom Marino was up to be the so-called drug czar in the administration of Donald Trump. He ran afoul of a bill that he supported that passed, in the House and the Senate, signed into law by President Obama, but it said that he's sort of aided and abetted the sale of drugs that have partly been responsible for the opioid expansion.
Yeah, I mean, really, I think this is just a factor that, opioids are such a hot topic right now. And if you're seen as a person who basically abetted the industry and giving people these drugs and making these drugs available to people, that doesn't look great if you're going to be the drug czar. Yeah, I
get the point. Now, overall, the opioid thing is one area. We've talked about the lack of bipartisanship, but isn't that the one area there seems to be support from Democrats and Republicans on?
Absolutely.
And the governor?
Absolutely, and that's why you've seen a number of bills over the last couple of years, legislation move through the Capitol trying to address this epidemic and this crisis. But going back to Marino, there was this big investigative report by the Washington Post in 60 Minutes that essentially blew this controversy into the open and really put the spotlight on the impact and the influence the industry has.
All right, thanks for coming on. Great update. All right, we're going to talk about winter energy prices, a subject you don't want to miss.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Well, we're going to take a look at energy prices and what's going to happen with energy. It's starting to get cold, as you know. That means we're all going to have to pay those energy bills. Joining me to talk about that is Nicole Grear. She's a manager, policy and research at the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, and Donna Clark. She's the vice president and general counsel of the aforementioned association. So, Nicole, let me start with you. What's the projection? We got heating oil, we got coal, we've got natural gas, we've got, I'm sure I'm skipping something here along the way about
electricity.
Oh yeah, a little thing like electricity. Thank you.
Kind of need that one to run all the other ones.
Yeah, we really do. So talk to me.
Well, the United States Energy Information Administration, they are projecting that home heating prices will be higher this winter because we're going to have a slightly colder than average winter. So
slightly than normal summer when it was warmer.
Something like that. So even though we had those couple of really big snowstorms the past couple winters, on the whole, the winter was a little bit warmer. I don't know if anybody really felt that in their pocketbooks, but they anticipate that it won't be quite so nice this winter. It'll be a little colder, and due to that increased demand, that we're all going to have a little bit higher energy prices.
Well, you also, in the material that you make public, you say here that natural gas expenditures to rise 12%, home heating oil 17%. I hope you're all writing this down. Electricity by 8% and propane by 18%.
Well, and I think those are national numbers, not just Pennsylvania numbers.
Great point.
So, and I think what the U.S. government is telling us that it is going to be very weather dependent. So whereas last winter was slightly warmer, they're expecting this winter to be slightly colder, and your energy prices will rise mostly because of weather-related issues, not because of the base cost of the fuel you're using. The other thing that we're always plugging is a good way to keep your energy costs down is to be more efficient. To make sure you're cleaning your furnace, to make sure you're doing all the things.
Turn those lights out when you go away. You mean don't leave a light on for 24 hours?
Running. Right.
All right, I don't know which of you want to deal with this, but we've had this constant debate now, particularly in the last 2 years, about the future of nuclear energy. We've got 3 nuclear plants in our state that have openly talked about laying people off. Anybody want to weigh into this? Is this going to be something that, how's it going to affect energy?
Well, from the perspective of our members, which are the large electric and gas utilities in Pennsylvania, so for example, in this area, it would be PPL and UGI, it would be PECO and PGW out in the eastern part of the state, Columbia, the First Energy companies, NFG. You know, we're neutral with respect to the issue of nuclear power. I mean, it is a baseload source of electricity in the state. It is part of the energy mix right now, but our members all go out on a wholesale market and buy their electrons, buy their gas molecules, and look for the best price.
Yeah, now, Nicole, there doesn't seem to be, you know, every now and then we go through a big controversy. Right now, you know, you have the expansion of natural gas, and depending on, you know, you want to get that to world markets, not just American markets. That's created Lancaster County, there's a big issue with it. But you don't seem to see as much activity around nuclear power as we did, you know, a couple of decades ago. Is that your sense, that there's just not a big, I'm not saying there are people who aren't opposed to it, but there doesn't seem to be as the intense interest that we saw years ago?
Right. Well, I mean, you think of the initial capital costs a company has to invest in creating a whole nuclear plant, right? I mean, I don't know particularly, but that's got to be extremely expensive. So I think in terms of shifting the national consciousness, a lot of nuclear plants, like you're talking about, have been around for 30, 40 years, and they're kind of established, and we've all kind of grown accustoed to that as part of the energy mix, as Donna was talking about.
Yeah, I'm not going to suggest it's not controversial. It just seems that the emphasis lately has been on the natural gas, on the fracked wells, and whether or not there's enough environmental safety. Maybe you folks can come back. We can talk a little more about the environmental safety. We're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to get into this whole business of what happens if, you know, you have people who have a lot of trouble paying for their electric, paying for their energy costs. Is there a solution? Is there some assistance? I think you have the answer to that, and we'll let you know what it is in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, advancing quality, improving lives.
Well, welcome back to the program. Low-income families get some assistance. I'm talking with Nicole Grear and Donna Clark from the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. All right, we hear the words LIHEAP, L-I-H-E-A-P. What's the LIHEAP program?
Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, I
Mouthful.
do believe. Right.
You got it.
So that's it's a federally funded program. It's a kind of a block grant program. So the federal government allocates money and divides it up amongst the states. So Pennsylvania gets approximately $209 million.
Wow.
And then the Department of Human Services, they administer the program. So they create a state plan every year, and they determine eligibility. They verify all the vendors, all of our members, all your electric utilities, but also your home heating fuels. They're all participating vendors. And low-income families can apply for that benefit and receive cash assistance for their home heating fuels.
Yeah, what else is fascinating, if I understand this correctly, is that they also work on energy reduction.
Correct.
As part of it, right?
Right, and as Nicole mentioned, the vendors would include all your electric utilities as well as your natural gas utilities, and the program has a cash and crisis part, and it also has a part that does weatherization. So that there's a program that's run through DHS and DCED that does weatherization, and in addition to that, all of the electric and natural gas utilities also have a separate program that provides weatherization to low-income families. So again, back to that energy efficiency issue. We want to help people pay their bills, but we also want to help them reduce the amount of energy they're using, which then reduces the bill.
Well, that only makes sense. I mean, it's one thing, look, the one thing that nobody wants is to have folks that for God's sake, in their families, they don't have any heat at all. It's, it's what, 20 degrees out and you don't have any heat. I mean, that makes no sense. But the other aspect about this is that the money that people get, as I understand it, is based on the size of the family and on their gross household income. Is that right?
Right. So for a family of four, I think the most recent numbers is about your total household income has to be about $36,000 or less. Now, again, if you go on DHS's website or the federal LIHEAP website, you can figure that out. It'll tell you exactly how many people are in your household and what the income threshold is.
Is this complicated?
No, not really. It's a simple chart. Everybody has it posted. They update it every year. The federal government updates those income guidelines, and you just figure out how many people are in your household, and right there on the chart tells you if you make this much or less, you can qualify.
And there's also an aspect. Oh, do you want to say?
Well, I also think too, for people who are looking to get assistance to pay their bills over the winter, they can talk to their county assistance office. They can talk to either their gas or electric utility. They will have information on LIHEAP. They can go to the Public Utility Commission's website. We all have information on LIHEAP. We all urge people to apply for LIHEAP who fall in that eligibility.
I notice, and people have to be careful because different, for example, the local electric and natural gas company may call it something else, right? So they have to be careful. We're talking about LIHEAP, but it may go by another name. Is that right?
Well, I think part of it is that LIHEAP is the federally funded program.
I got it.
The programs that utilities run are actually funded by all of us as residential ratepayers. So the federal government, as Nicole said, puts $209 million into Pennsylvania to help with LIHEAP. All of us as residential ratepayers spend approximately $418 million a year.
All right, we're out of time, but call your local utility company if you're in doubt about it. Is that a yes or a no?
Yes.
Yes,
Is that the way to do it?
And one assistance
Quickly.
does not preclude the other. So you can get LIHEAP federal assistance, and you can get assistance from your utility too.
Thanks for the update. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.